In this lesson, we are going to learn how to add and subtract integers. Integers are positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. Now, the book has added in some fractions in here, and we are going to practice with those because we did learn how to add and subtract fractions in the section 0.1. But just so y'all know what an integer is, it's a positive and negative whole number, including 0. We're going to work in section 0.3 in your textbook on pages 28 and 29, and we're going to do problem numbers 2 through 66 even. So I have some rules that I use to help students know what to do when you're adding and subtracting these integers. When you are adding and your signs are the same, meaning you've got two positive numbers added together, or you're adding two negative numbers together, the rule is to add and then keep the sign. So let's look at some examples here to let us know what that means, okay? So I've got a negative number plus a negative number. So I'm adding, and my signs are the same, they're both negative. So that tells me that I'm going to add the numbers together. So 3 plus 9 is 12. And the directions say to keep the sign. So since those numbers were both negative, that means my answer will be negative as well. You can also think of it in money. I always tell my students that whenever they put something in money terms, they'll get it right because they're not going to let anybody mess with their money. So let's say that you are overdrafted in your account by $3, meaning you owe the bank $3. And you use your card and you spend another $9. So that means that you owe the bank $12. So now let's look at the next example, which should be very familiar to you guys. A 4 plus 7, a positive plus a positive. So they're the same sign and you're adding. So that means you add those two numbers together. So 4 plus 7 is 11. And it would be positive because both of those numbers were already positive. Okay? So now let's look and see what we do when our signs are different. So when your signs are different, meaning you're adding a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive, the rule says to subtract those two numbers and then you keep the sign of whichever number is bigger. So let's look here at example 3. You're adding and you've got different signs. You've got a negative number and a positive number. Okay, so that means we have to subtract those numbers. 9 minus 4 is 5. And then it says keep the sign of the bigger number. Well, the bigger number was 9. The 9 was positive. So that means my answer is also positive. A way you can think about it with money. Let's say you owed the bank $4. But then you get a sad little paycheck of $9 and you put that $9 in the bank. Well, that covers the $4 that you owed them, so you have available to you $5. Okay? Then let's look at problem or example number 4. You are adding and your signs are different. You've got a positive number plus a negative number. So that tells us to subtract these, okay? So 18 minus 6 gives us a 12. And then 18 is the larger number. So it's negative, so that means that our answer will be negative. Money terms, you have $6 in the bank account, but you go to the store and you spend $18. So that means that you owe the bank $12. You took out more than what you had. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at page 28 in our text. So on number 2, I have 3 plus 9. And before we go through these problems, if you need to rewind and write down those rules on your paper, that might be helpful, because I'm not going to keep bringing the paper down for you to see the rules. So if you do need to take a second to go back and write those on your notes so you have them, feel free to do so. That way when we're doing these problems, you can reference those notes while we do these. So on number 2, we are adding, and they're both positive, okay? So they have the same sign. So that rule tells us that we add those two numbers together. So 9 plus 3 is 12. And then it says keep the sign. So since they were both a positive, that means that my answer is going to be positive. So number 4 says I have -6 plus -7. So for the record, if any of y'all get confused when you see these parentheses around here, it's just separating a number that's negative with that addition sign. It's just trying to prevent some confusion. So just so you guys know why those parentheses are there. So we're adding, and our signs are the same because I've got a negative number plus a negative number. So that tells us that we add those numbers together. So 6 plus 7 gives us 13. But since our numbers were negative, that means that my answer will also be negative. Okay, let's look at problem number 6. 9 plus a -2. So 9 plus -2. We are adding, and our signs are different. I've got a positive number and a negative number. So that rule, when signs are different, tells us that we subtract. So 9 minus 2 is 7. And the rule also tells us that we keep the sign of the bigger number. So 9 was bigger than 2, so 9 was positive. It was the biggest number, it was positive, so that means my answer will also be positive. All right, problem number 8 says I have -7 plus 11. I am adding, and my signs are different. So that means that I subtract those numbers. So 11 minus 7 is 4. And then you've got to find the bigger number, because whichever number is bigger, that's how you know what your answer sign is going to be. So the 11 was bigger than the -7. So since 11 was positive, that means my answer will be positive. Problem number 10 says I have 5 plus -8. So you are adding, and your signs are different. So that means that you're going to subtract those numbers. So 8 minus 5 is 3. And you have to find which number is bigger. That's what our rules say. So 8 was bigger than 5. So since that 8 was negative, that means my answer is negative. Problem number 12 says I have 8 plus -7. So I'm adding, and my signs are different. So that means that I subtract those numbers. So 8 minus 7 is 1. And 8 was the bigger number. So since 8 was positive, that means that my answer is also going to be positive. Okay, so problem number 14 says that I have 7 plus negative 7. So if I have 7 plus a negative 7, I am adding, and my signs are different. So I subtract them. So 7 minus 7 is 0. Now, 0 is neither positive nor is it negative. So our answer is simply 0. Problem number 16 says I have negative 6 plus 8. I'm adding, and my signs are different. That means that I'm going to subtract those numbers. So 8 minus 6 is 2. And you look for the you look for the bigger number. So 8 was bigger than that 6. So that means that since our 8 was positive, that means our 2 is also going to be positive. Problem number 18 says I have 5 plus negative 20. So you're adding, and your signs are different. And they haven't given us one in a while where the signs were the same. My goodness. So you're adding and your signs are different. So that means that you're going to subtract them. 20 minus 5 is 15. Now, 20 was my larger number. It was negative, so that means that my answer will also be negative. All right, now looking at problem number 20, we have 0 plus negative 10. Well, you're adding, signs are different, so you subtract. 10 minus 0 is 10. And which number was larger, the 0 or the 10? That answer would be the 10. It was negative, so that means your answer is also negative. Now let's look up here and let's go to problem number 22. Problem number 22 says I have negative 7 plus 3. So you're adding, and your signs are different. So you subtract them. So 7 minus 3 is 4. And you take the sign of the larger number. So the 7 is larger than the 3. So since your 7 was negative, that means that your answer will also be negative. Problem number 24 says I have negative 9 plus 9. You're adding, signs are different, so that means you're going to subtract them. Well, 9 minus 9 is 0. And remember, we talked about on number 14 that 0 is neither positive nor is it negative, so we just leave our answer as 0. Okay, now let's look at problem number 26. This is where you might stroke out on me a little bit. They've added the fractions in here. I've got negative 35 over 16 plus 17 over 16. So we are adding, and first off, when we're adding fractions, we talked about a golden rule when adding fractions. That golden rule, remember, is that you have to have a common denominator. So it looks here like they have, for the most part, given us all common denominators. So we should be okay here. So let's look. You're adding and your signs are different. You've got a negative number and then a positive number. So that means that you're going to subtract, okay? So 35 minus 17 is 18. And remember, you keep that denominator of a 16. And you know the sign of your answer based on which number was larger. So that 35 was larger than the 17. And since the 35 was negative, that means that our answer will be negative. Just don't forget that you can still simplify this by dividing each of these by 2. So negative 18 divided by 2 is 9. 16 divided by 2 is 4. Or 8, sorry. So let's try that one more time. Negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. 16 divided by 2 is 8. So your final answer should be negative 9 over 8. Problem number 28. I've got negative 81 over 20 plus negative 107 over 20. So you're adding, and for the first time in a long time, they've given us one where your signs are the same. So if you look at your rule for what happens when your signs are the same, that tells us that you add those numbers together. So that gives us 188. And then keep that 20. And it says keep your sign. If you look up at the top of the page that we started off with our notes, the rule says that you keep the sign after you have added. So since they were both negative, that means that our answer is negative. But we're not done, because we can see that we can simplify this. We can divide each of these by 2. It's just an easy number to use. So that'll give us negative 188 divided by 2 will give me a negative 94. And then 20 divided by 2 is 10. And you can divide those numbers by 2 again. So negative 94 divided by 2 is negative 47. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5. So our answer would be negative 47 over 5. Now on problem number 30, we're actually going to skip that problem. The reason is because if you look at it, it's actually a subtraction problem, and you guys haven't learned how to do subtraction yet. There's a different rule that you use for subtraction. So we are in fact going to skip number 30. If you did end up doing number 30 and you just wanted to know what the answer was, I'm more than happy to tell you that the answer in the book is 17 over 8, but again, we're not going to actually do that problem. So let's look at number 32. 32 says I have negative 7 plus 8 plus negative 6. So they have given us 3 separate numbers that we're supposed to add together. Guys, do the first 2, combine them, and then worry about that last number. So we're just going to do this part right here. So imagine that negative 6 isn't even there. So I have negative 7 plus 8. You're adding, and your signs are different. So that means you subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. So 8 minus 7 is 1. And since 8 was the bigger number, it was positive. That means that our answer will be positive. So that's how we get a 1 here. Then you bring down that plus negative 6, and you work that as another part of the problem. So you're adding, and your signs are different. So that means that you subtract those numbers. So 6 minus 1 is 5. And keep the sign of the larger number. Since your larger number, 6, since it was negative, that means that your answer will be negative. Let's look at problem number 34. Problem 34 says that we have 12 plus negative 6 plus negative 4. So remember, we're going to do these first two numbers. We're going to add them together first, and then we'll worry about that last number. So I've got 12 plus negative 6. You're adding. Your signs are different, so you subtract those numbers. So 12 minus 6 is 6. And since 12 was your larger number, that means that your answer is positive, just like the 12 was. Now we're going to bring down that plus negative 4. So we are adding. Our signs are different. So that means that we're going to subtract those numbers. So 6 minus 4 is 2. Keep the sign of the bigger number. 6 was bigger than negative 4. Since 6 was positive, our answer is positive. Alright, so now let's look at problem number 36. We have 7 plus negative 8 plus negative 9 plus 10. Let's work these first two problems. So 7 plus negative 8. You're adding, and your signs are different. So that means that you're going to subtract them. 8 minus 7 is 1. The 8 was larger. Since it was negative, that means your answer is negative. So now we bring everything else down just so we don't lose that 10. So plus negative 9 plus 10. So now we do these first two again, and we just continue this pattern until we don't have any more numbers to add. So you're adding, and your signs are the same. You've got two negative numbers. So that means you add them together. So 1 plus 9 is 10, and you have to keep the sign. So since they were both negative, that means that your answer is also negative. Now let's bring down our plus 10. So you're adding. Your signs are different. So that means that you are going to subtract those two numbers. So 10 minus 10 is 0. And remember, since 0 is neither positive nor negative, that means that we just leave it as a regular 0. So we've talked about adding, and we've done a good bit of problems dealing with adding integers. So now let's talk about subtracting them. So when you are subtracting, your rule is keep, change, opposite. Some people say keep, change, change. That works as well. And then use your adding rules, just like we've talked about. So let's start off with example 5. And let's say that we have 9 minus negative 3. So notice that this is a subtraction problem. So our rule tells us that we keep this first number the same. We're going to change this subtraction to addition. And then we do the opposite of this second number. So the opposite of negative 3 is a positive 3. Then use your adding rules. So you're adding, your signs are the same, so you add them together and keep the sign that they were both. So since they were both positive, that means that our answer is positive. Let's try another one. We have negative 12 minus negative 2. That's a whole bunch of negatives. So you still do it the same exact way. Do not let it intimidate you. Keep this first number the same. Change this subtraction to addition. And then you do the opposite of negative 2, which gives you a positive 2. So now I've got negative 12 plus 2. You're adding and your signs are different. So you subtract those numbers and you keep the sign of whatever number was larger. Since 12 was larger and it was negative, that means your answer is going to be negative. So let's practice some of these. We've got problem numbers 38 through 66 for subtraction. So when we look at problem number 38, we have 7 minus 5. Well, I'm pretty sure you guys could do this one without my subtraction rule. If you were just to say, well, guys, I know that 7 minus 5 is 2. Okay, that works too. But what if you did the keep change opposite rule? Would it still work? I always get that question. Well, let's look at it. You keep this first number the same, change the subtraction to addition, and the opposite of 5 would be a negative 5. So now you're adding, your signs are different, so you subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. So 7 minus 5 is 2, and you keep the sign of whichever one number was bigger. So since that 7 was larger and it was positive, that means that your answer is positive. So notice we got the same thing. Problem number 40, I've got 4 minus 9. So the rule is keep, change, opposite. So you're adding and your signs are different. So you're going to subtract. 9 minus 4 is 5. And you keep the sign of the larger number. So since 9 was larger than 4, then the 9 was negative, so that makes your answer negative. Okay, number 42 says that we have negative 13 minus 8. Keep, change, opposite. You are adding, your signs are the same, so that means you add and keep the sign. So 13 plus 8 is 21. Your numbers were both negative, so that means that your answer will also be negative. Problem number 44 says I have 9 minus 15. So keep, change, opposite. So you're adding and your signs are different. So you subtract those numbers to get a 6. And you keep the sign of the larger number. Since 15 was larger and it was negative, that makes your answer negative. Okay. If you needed me to put this in money terms, then the original problem for number 44 was 9 minus 15. A lot of people like it when I do the money talks. So let's say that you have $9 in your bank account and you withdraw 15, meaning you're taking out $15. Well, you didn't have $15 to take. So that means that they loaned you $6, which means that you have to pay that back. You owe them that 6. All right, so now let's look at problem number 46. Negative 9 minus negative 6. Keep, change, opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. So negative 9 plus 6. You're adding. Your signs are different, so you subtract them. So 9 minus 6 is 3, and you keep the sign of the larger number. So since 9 was larger and it was a negative, that makes your answer a negative. Problem number 48. I have 9 minus a negative 7. So the rule is keep, change, opposite of negative 7 is positive 7. So now our problem is just 9 plus 7. We know that 9 plus 7 is 16. Problem number 50 says we have 50 minus negative 25. So your rule is keep, change, opposite of negative 25 is 25. So again, 50 plus 25 is what we have, which gives us 75. Problem number 52 says that I have negative 20 minus a negative 30. So the rule is keep, change, opposite of negative 30 is a positive 30. And so now we're adding, and our signs are different. So you subtract them. 30 minus 20 is 10. And you've got to look which one's bigger. That tells us what our sign is. 30 was bigger than 20. Since 30 is positive, that makes my 10 positive. Problem number 54 says I have negative 30 minus negative 20. So the rule is keep, change, opposite of negative 20 is positive 20. So negative 30 plus 20. We're adding, our signs are different, so you subtract them. 30 minus 20 is 10, but this time 30 is larger than 20, but the 30 was negative. Since the 30 was negative, it was the larger number, that makes our answer the larger, or our answer negative. All right, problem number 56 says I have 18 minus negative 12. So the rule is to keep, change, opposite of negative 12 is positive 12. So now I have 18 plus 12 is 30. So since they were both positive, that means my answer is also going to be positive. Problem 58. I have negative 25 minus negative 30. So my rule is to keep, change, opposite. So I'm adding. My signs are different, so I subtract them. 30 minus 25 is 5. And since our 30 was the larger number and it was positive, that means my answer is going to also be positive. Problem number 60. All right, so I've got negative 4 over 2 minus 3 over 2. So we do have a common denominator, so we're okay there. So our subtraction rule is to keep, Change that subtraction to addition. And the opposite of a positive 3 is a negative 3. So we know our denominator is going to stay at 2. Negative 4 plus negative 3. We're adding and our signs are the same. So that means you add those numbers together, which gives me a 7. Because 4 plus 3 is 7. And then since your numbers are negative, that means that your answer is negative. Sorry about that, guys. It looks like that my video seems to have frozen a little bit. I'll restart it and then we'll re-explain that one more time.